Carry on Constitution. Chapter 9.
As David left engineering, his communicator sounded.
Bridge to Captain.
David replied, Stevens here. From the comm unit.
Sir, we have a cluster of objects about 500,000 meters in our path.
David replied, objects? Moving? Makeup? The answer was,
No movement. Refined metal, what they are, we don't know. We will need to get closer to scan them effectively.
David answered, Ultralight 1, stop within 1,000 meters. I'm on my way. David arrived on the bridge. The first officer called out.
Captain on the bridge.
David replied, as you were. Number 1, what have we got? Larry responded.
Unknown. But if I were to take a wild guess, I'd say we have a dead fleet ahead.
Then from the science station.
Captain, it is as Commander Sorensen said, it is a fleet of ships. No movement, no life signs. Dead.
David turned to his first officer. Larry, take a team over to that lead ship and find out what you can. Larry grinned.
Aye, aye, sir.
He tapped his comm badge.
Captain O'Reilly, may I have Commander Hardwick join my away team?
O'Reilly replied.
He'll meet you in the teleporter room.
Then Larry again tapped his comm badge.
Lieutenant Southern, please meet me in the teleporter room with 3 other security personnel.
Jamie replied.
Aye, aye, sir.
Again Larry tapped his comm badge.
Ensign Tasser, please meet me in the teleporter room. I need a computer specialist.
Ensign Tasser replied.
Aye, aye, sir.
Once again, he tapped his comm badge.
Dr. M. Tao, please assign 2 med techs to my team and have them meet me in the teleporter room.
Dr. Mtao replied.
May I ask the purpose?
Larry smiled.
We will be investigating a seemingly dead fleet dead ahead.
The doctor replied.
We will meet you in the teleporter room.
Larry replied.
We?
The doctor answered.
Yes, we. I'm assigning myself. I never get to do the fascinating stuff.
Larry responded.
Good enough. I'm on my way. See you there.
Gathered in the teleporter room were George Hardwick, Jamie Southern, Dr. M. Tao, Ensign Tasser, 3 other security personnel, and another medtech. David and Larry entered the teleporter room and saw the team assembled. David turned to his first officer. Larry, take care and keep me informed. Larry responded.
Aye, aye, sir.
To his team.
Let's go. Energize.
David watched as the team melted away in a cloud of sparkling motes of light. A moment later, those in the Constitution heard the first officer's voice.
Captain, we arrived on what seems to be the bridge. Every position manned with lifeless bodies. Humanoid, average Earth size, height, and weight, male and female. As far as I can tell, they should be alive, but they aren't.
David wondered. Was this a fleet that had come in contact with the death pulse? Suddenly there was a scream over the comm. Then Larry said, in a whisper,
Captain, you're needed here.
Then nothing. David grabbed a personal shield and jumped onto the teleporter pad. Lieutenant Stevens, you have the con. Surely, teleport me over there. Stella was startled but could only reply.
Aye, sir.
David arrived next to an unconscious Larry. The team members were all unconscious. Then David heard, felt, sensed a voice in his head, much like when Sorge was communicating with him.
Who are you? What happened to us? Why are you here? What happened to the others?
David thought back. I am Captain David Stevens of the System Heavy Cruiser Constitution. We detected your fleet, motionless, with no life signs, and decided to investigate. I would guess you tried to communicate with the others and knock them out. David checked the life signs in his crew. They will all be okay, but they will wake up with a terrific headache. We have come into contact with a civilization that tried to communicate with anyone in the universe. Unfortunately, their attempt caused all life, as we know it, to take on the form you in which you find yourself. What do you call yourself? David heard the reply.
I am Admiral Jose Calfram. This is my fleet.
David said, Admiral, I believe we can reverse the death pulse. Just have your people get close to their bodies. Again David heard.
I'll do that.
David spoke, Admiral, we are a peaceful race. We want only to get to know you and exchange knowledge. However, our mission is urgent, so we would be able to stay only a very short while. If you're ready, I will tell my engineer to activate the life pulse. The Admiral replied.
We are ready.
David smiled. Teleporter, teleport the away team back and alert sickbay. They are all unconscious. Shirley replied.
Aye, sir.
And the team teleported back to the Constitution. David tapped his comm badge. Captain O'Reilly, please activate the life pulse, now. O'Reilly's voice replied.
Aye, aye, sir.
Then suddenly, the crew of the Admiral's ship came to life. David looked around. Which one of you is Admiral Calfram? A tall, powerfully built man stood up and spoke.
Admiral Calfram, I believe, is in her quarters. I am Captain Jeffries of the Imperial Star Cruiser, Emperor Skyen, this ship. This is the Admiral's flagship.
Looking as menacingly as he could, Captain Jeffries scowled at David.
And who are you?
David replied, I'm Captain David Stevens of the System Heavy Cruiser Constitution. We are the ones that found you in your state of disembodiment and caused you to return to life in your bodies. Jeffries asked.
How do you know of Admiral Calfram?
David returned. When I came aboard your ship, the Admiral contacted my mind. And I guess you could say, we talked. He told me who he was, and I told him who we are, and that we could reverse the disembodied state you were in. He agreed. About that time, a handsome woman entered the bridge. One of the bridge crew shouted.
Admiral on the bridge.
She immediately replied.
As you were.
Stepping over to where David and Jeffries were standing, she spoke, looking at David, holding out her hand.
Captain Stevens, I am so glad to meet you.
David saluted then took her hand. Admiral. Might I suggest that your communications officer contact the rest of your fleet? We really need to know whether everyone was returned to life. The Admiral turned to Captain Jeffries and said.
Cal, do as Captain Stevens suggested, please.
David smiled in embarrassment. I beg your forgiveness, twice. Now, I have been surprised that a woman was the one who first contacted me. I guess I should not assume that my correspondent was a man. David continued, you probably already know, we represent the United System of Planets. May I ask about your people? The Admiral replied.
We represent the Empire of Soren, a system of a dozen civilizations in this quadrant of space. We are a fleet of peaceful explorers. Our mission is to seek out other peoples and civilizations for the same reason you gave to me about your people. And please, don't concern yourself with your confusion about my gender. In the non-corporeal state, we could not distinguish gender ourselves.
She went on.
How did you know what to do for Uese?
Working with a non-corporeal agent from their planet, we were able to determine the cause and find a means of reversing it. That agent turned out to be a charming young woman. The question is, what can we do to help your civilization? Our solution is very limited in range. She responded.
Can you give Uese the secret to this regeneration?
David answered. I'll have my chief engineer give you the schematic for the life pulse generator and have one of our engineers work with your people to translate the schematic into something your people can use. With that, David tapped his comm badge. Captain O'Reilly, please send one of your people over here with the schematic for the life pulse generator to help these people to build a generator of their own. O'Reilly replied.
I'll be right there, sir.
O'Reilly materialized on the bridge of the Emperor Skellen, right next to David and the Admiral. The Admiral was surprised.
What, how?
O'Reilly answered.
It is simply our way of getting from one place to another. However, it would take a long time to help you develop your own system. I'm sure my captain has told you about the urgency of our mission.
The Admiral replied.
Yes, yes. It is a shame. I would really like to get to know your people. We too are a peace-loving system and would like to correspond with you.
O'Reilly handed David a pulse generator, completely sealed except the power input connector and a single button. Into David's ear, O'Reilly whispered.
I replicated the unit and sealed it with an anti-tamper device.
David spoke. Admiral, if we could visit with one of your engineers, Captain O'Reilly could tell them about the power input, so that you may be able to use this device effectively. The Admiral turned to her captain.
Call Chief Cern and introduce her to Captain O'Reilly.
The captain answered.
Aye, Admiral.
She turned back to David.
Do you have a female crew members, Captain?
David smiled. Every member of my crew is married to another crew member. We have many very talented male and female crew members. I'm in command of the best ship and finest crew in the system Navy. Can you tell that I'm very proud of my ship and crew? Captain Jeffries interjected.
About as proud as I am of my ship and crew. It seems we are very much alike, Captain Stevens.
The Admiral said.
Captain Jeffries is the finest ship's captain in our fleet.
Captain Jeffries blushed, and David said, and modest too. Captain Jeffries' communications officer reported.
Captain, all ships of the fleet report that all personnel have revived.
Jeffries turned to the Admiral.
Admiral, Captain Stevens, we are all revived. Thank you so much.
Admiral Calfram turned to David.
Captain Stevens, as soon as Captain O'Reilly has taught our engineers how to use the life pulse generator, I suppose you will continue your mission.
David replied, and you can begin a mission to revive those around you. We still have to figure a way to stop the death pulse before it affects too many more civilizations. O'Reilly returned to the bridge and reported that his assignment was completed. David tapped his comm badge, Constitution, 2 to teleport home. Turning to the Admiral and Captain, David said, hope to see you again. Goodbye. And saluting, he and O'Reilly dissolved in a shower of motes of light. As David and Captain O'Reilly arrived on the teleporter pad, David ordered, bridge, ahead ultralight 14. David felt the release of pent-up energy as the mighty cruiser leapt forward. He smiled at his friend, Captain, and Chief Engineer, O'Reilly. I love the way this old ship responds. Thank you, old friend. O'Reilly turned to his captain.
Aye, sir. She is beautiful in that way. Now, I'll go and work on our little problem of stopping the death pulse.
They parted, one to engineering, the other to the bridge. David entered the bridge, and Lieutenant Stevens jumped out of the command chair.
Captain on the bridge.
As you were, came David's immediate response. Status, Lieutenant Stevens. She replied.
Ultralight 14. Back to the fleet. All systems go.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Carry on, I'll be in my ready room. She lifted one eyebrow, but replied.
Aye, sir.
David entered his ready room. Computer, prepare to copy. Then David recorded the coordinates where they had discovered the fleet of the Empire of Soren, date and time, his observations of the people, and level of technology. About then, the annunciator of his door chimed. Enter, David commanded. In stepped Lieutenant Stevens.
Captain, it's shift change.
David replied, you know what to do, don't you? She replied.
Yes, sir.
He said, then do it.
Aye, sir.
She resumed her seat in the command chair and waited. Commander Carson stepped up to Lieutenant Stevens.
Lieutenant, you are relieved.
She stood, smiled.
I am relieved. Commander, we are at Ultralight 14, toward the fleet, all systems are go.
She walked toward the turbo lift and exited the bridge. Joel took his place in the command chair.
Normal routine, Ultralight 14.
The next day, David asked Captain O'Reilly to upgrade the communications system by adding the hyperspace transceiver to the ship's system. O'Reilly answered.
I've already begun to plan those modifications, Captain. But I'm going to have to ask for those former engineers you have listed assigned to us. We're just overwhelmed right now.
David answered, they'll be on the way shortly. David stuck his head out and called, Larry, that list of crewmen with engineering experience, assign them to Captain O'Reilly, now. We'll have to run short in some sections until we get to the fleet. Larry replied.
Aye, Captain. Should we tell them to wear engineering colors?
David answered, I trust you're just being facetious. Colors don't matter, but it might be good for the crew to see all three colors working to keep us on mission. Larry chuckled.
Aye, sir.
Then David called over to the communications officer, tall, ship-wide please. He replied.
Ship-wide, aye.
Now hear this, this is the captain. We have to reassign personnel with engineering experience to Captain O'Reilly. All section chiefs and senior officers meet with me in the conference room in 30 minutes. Stevens out. David walked out of his ready room. Larry, Lieutenant Stevens, tall, you're with me. Stella started.
Me?
David smiled at her. You are Lieutenant Stevens, are you not? A puzzled look on her face.
Yes, sir.
Then you're with me, David said. The four entered the turbo lift. Stella turned to David.
Captain, why me?
He answered, Lieutenant, I am interested in the advancement of your career. You are being trained to captain your own cruiser eventually. She looked at David in amazement.
Aye, aye, Captain.
The turbo lift came to a stop, and they exited it. Stella hung back a moment, and as David left the lift, she patted him on the rear. He turned, smiling. Come along, Lieutenant. The conference room was a little crowded, but as David entered, Larry called the room to attention. David responded, Ladies and gentlemen, please be at ease. He walked to the head of the table. We have an urgent mission, you all know that. Captain O'Reilly has 3 major projects. 1. Get us back to the fleet as fast as possible. That means pushing the ultralight drive engines as hard as possible, and all that means in the way of maintenance. 2. Work on stopping the death pulse. For that, we need everyone on the ship thinking. 3. Installing the hyperspace transceiver so that Lieutenant Jensen and his crew can use its improved speed to keep us in touch with the system Navy and the Admiral. Therefore, some crewmen have been reassigned to Captain O'Reilly. Some of you may have to run shorthanded. Schedule your remaining crewmen to compensate. Questions? David continued, No questions? Comments? Larry spoke up.
Thank you, Captain. I believe we all know what needs to be done just to get home. We're all on board with you.
David returned, Thank you, number 1. So say you all? As one voice.
So say us all.
Then let's get back to work, we have a ship to run, said David.